closer, this is like a PG-13 version of the story, because it's gross, guys. I don't want to get into that. But yeah, okay, so this is like the mild version. Okay. Pornography. Researchers say that it can be almost as addicting, if not as addicting, as drugs such as heroin, methamphetamine, and alcohol. And sometimes those addictions can make people do absolutely disgusting and morbid things. Take Ted Bundy, for example. After doing extensive research on the man who most people would consider an absolute monster, I have come to realize more of his reasoning behind his actions. So that is why today I want to discuss with you the infamous Ted Bundy murders and trial. American serial killer and rapist Ted Bundy looks like a handsome and charismatic young man. However, he is responsible for at least 36 murders of innocent women across 7 different states in the United States. When Ted Bundy was growing up, he never really knew who he was. He was born out of wedlock, so in order to hide his mother's shame, he grew up thinking his grandparents were his parents while his mother was his sister. So one could only imagine what that's going to do to a young boy's psyche. So maybe that's why around the age of 3, he became absolutely obsessed with knives and everything that you could do with them. He would sometimes even slice open live animals just to see their internal organs. And friends and family would find knives hidden in places like his pillowcase or even his desk at school. So he didn't really have that many friends, but he did do well in school, and eventually he did grow up to be a really well-respected lawyer in Florida. While Ted Bundy was attending Washington University studying law, he met the absolute love of his life. She was everything he could possibly want in a girl. She was beautiful and smart and came from a really well-to-do family, and she really knew what she wanted to do with her life. But she didn't see the same things in Ted. So naturally, he was absolutely devastated when she broke up with him. And that was the trigger. Authorities have noticed that about 90% of his victims looked like his previous girlfriend, meaning they had brown hair, dark brown eyes, and all white porcelain skin. And Joni Lynch just happened to be his first target. Joni Lynch was 18 years old, and she was sleeping in her bed when Ted Bundy broke into her house, raped her repeatedly, and then continued to beat her with her own metal bedpool. Miraculously, though, she lived through the entire thing. However, she did suffer severe brain damage and does not remember a thing of that night. So even though Ted Bundy did not physically murder her, he mentally did, because she had to start her entire life over, from learning her name to the ABCs. After Joni Lynch, though, Ted continued to murder for years before he ever got arrested. And when he got arrested, it wasn't even for murder, it was for things like attempted burglary. And when he got arrested, he managed to escape his jail cell. Authorities didn't notice he was missing for 15 hours until after he was gone. That put 1,000 miles in between him and the police. Just enough time for him to commit the Chi Omega sorority house murders. That night, Ted Bundy broke into the Chi Omega sorority house in Florida and raped and beat 4 innocent girls, taking 2 of their lives. He absolutely mutilated their bodies and even decapitated 2 of them. But being Ted Bundy, he did manage to escape. And 2 days later, his last victim was 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. Kimberly was attending her junior high school, and she was on her way to her PE class when she noticed that she didn't have her book bag. So she told her friend she'd be right back, she's going to go to homeroom and get it, but she never returned. Ted Bundy lured her into her car, and she was never ever seen again. And her body was found 2.5 months later in the nearby woods, and she was absolutely mutilated. 3 days after Kimberly Leach's body was found, Ted Bundy was caught for driving a stolen vehicle, thank God. And he decided to represent himself in court, which when you go to law school, that's the number one thing that you learn, to never represent yourself. And that was Ted Bundy's downfall. Now, believe it or not, he was married the whole 15 years that he was murdering, and his wife never suspected a thing. And so his mother and his wife were absolutely convinced of his innocence until the very end, the day before he was put to death. That is when he admitted to murdering 36 young girls and committing acts of necrophilia. Now, for those of you that don't know what that is, for lack of a better word, it's basically raping the dead. And he would do that. He would go back to the bodies months after he'd killed them and continue to have sex with them. Ted Bundy was executed on the morning of January 24th of 1989 at 7:13 a.m. And thousands of people crowded around the execution home, cheering on his death. In Ted Bundy's last interview, he admitted the reason for why he committed such actions. When he was a young boy, he was obsessed with pornographic comic books. They would show women getting beaten and abused, and he never ever saw women as more than anything as sex objects. And that's exactly how he treated all his victims. Thank you.
That one? All right, Jacob, what did you think?
I liked how Ted Bundy was explained at the beginning because, like, at the start of the speech when he mentioned his name, I had no idea who he was, so there was a good explanation between that. I liked how the pornography topic was mentioned at the beginning, and then, like, it was kind of put off till the end to conclude the whole thing and wrap it all up. And then I thought it was good how you mentioned, like, all the statistics at the start, like, to show how many people he had killed, like, just as an intro, instead of, like, just naming all the people off at once, and then you kind of went back and then, like, went through everybody at, like, one time, which was good. And then I thought it was really good how there was a lot of, like, different statistics and different things, but I just didn't notice how the sources were cited or anything. And then I just thought it was a little bit short, but everything else was pretty good.
All right. Well, I'm going to agree with some of those things. A couple things maybe I'll feel a little bit differently about. I like the opening of the speech. I actually like the disclaimer that you have because I think it makes it a little bit more interesting to people. There's the PG-13 version of this horrific tale, and that'll intrigue people. They'll go, what am I missing here? What horrible things are being left out in the story? The topic identification is fine. You've got the visual that's kind of a wallpaper for the presentation, so I'm going to talk about that in a second, but it identifies the subject pretty clearly. I think you could do a little bit more on the justification. You mentioned pornography as an issue, and I thought there was going to be a little bit more development of some of those points as part of the presentation, but it only becomes a sidelight. It's like you use it as part of the introduction and then you use it at the end to kind of give us a little bit more explanation. I thought that you did a very nice job telling the story. In other words, kind of relating the horrifying events in the PG-13 manner that is necessary with enough detail to know that this is, in fact, you said some people think of it as a monster. I can't imagine anybody thinking of it as anything but a monster. Although he did have those characteristics that you described. He seemed like on the face of it, a bright guy, charismatic. He had a lot of things going for him in his life, and I think we could have gotten a little bit more about what was going on before, right before he got involved in all the crime. You mentioned the thing about breaking up with the one woman, and then at the end, we find out that he's married, and it's, well, where did she come from? I think that if you're going to do it in a chronology, you got to get some of the chronology that you're going to mention later into the story. I thought that was a little bit awkward, but that wasn't a big deal. Organizationally, like I said, I think the middle section is all in a sequence, time sequencing stuff, and that's fine. There were very good internal transitions as you were moving between the points. I like that. And the visual materials, you just have the one slide, and it's a good image. Plus, it's got all of those women at the bottom, so it gives us a sense of how significant his crimes were, at least in terms of numbers of people that he is responsible for. I do think that there were probably some other things that you could include in the presentation to maybe add some information. You mentioned some statistical kinds of things. There are events, maybe a timeline, for instance. I think that could be included in it. You mentioned that he's arrested once and then he was escaped, and we don't really get any sense of what the time period was between the time he was first arrested, the time he escaped, when he was captured again. Right at the end, I think we get a little bit of chronology with the sorority house murders, and then the last murder. That all seemed to happen within a week or so. But everything else, I'm not sure did this occur over. At one point, you did say 15 years, so we know that is kind of going on. So his first murder to his last murder was a 15-year period. Like I said, that I think would have been a good thing, maybe to have a timeline on or something along those lines. You do a very nice job speaking to the audience. You look at us, you are engaged, you know the story that you're telling, so I think that gives you a great deal of confidence when you're speaking to us, and we're going to accept you as being very credible on the subject. The only thing that seems to suggest any anxiety is you got nervous feet. You kind of shifting your weight back and forth, but it's not a big deal. That'll be something that you can calm down on. Otherwise, I thought you did an excellent job there. All right, thank you.